My name is Sophie. I am a 1L at Harvard Law School, and when I was little, I gave up my genetic data to 23andMe.
For the most part, people are 99.5% identical in their or more in their genetics, but that little bit that's different, you can tell if they're predisposed to certain diseases, and also just their cultural history, like where did their family come from around the world.
I was adopted when I was 9 months old, and I had no documentation of who my birth parents were. But as I got older, I became really interested in potentially figuring out where I had come from. And so I started to look into genetic testing.
23andMe was life-changing.
Genetic data is incredibly valuable and increasingly valuable.
We know what we're looking for now, potentially, but we're also looking for variations that could inform the future. The genetic companies are always looking at new genetic sites, at sites that haven't been different before.
It's really easy to order a 23andMe kit. They do a sale every year for Christmas time, and then they ship it straight to your house. And then to collect the sample, it's incredibly user-friendly. All you have to do is spit in this tube, but once you do that, you just seal it, and then you send it off in the mail.
So with genetic information in the medical setting, you would always ask someone whether it would be okay to gather genetic information about them. We have a federal law, HIPAA. If you give your data to a website that promises to tell you from your genetic data about your ancestry and the history of your family, they are not covered by the HIPAA law, which was designed to reach information gathered for treatment. And once they have your genetic information, they can turn around and sell it to anyone, and they don't get your further consent to do that.
Sometimes they say explicitly it's going to be de-identified, sometimes they don't, and people miss that. So your name can be linked to your genetic data, and then you can face discrimination for insurance and healthcare. You can face discrimination for your job. You can face discrimination about other services you can obtain in the world.
The thing about genetic data that makes it different from a lot of other kinds of data that you might have in a medical record or something is that it's kind of group data. So if you put your genome in a database, you have, without getting the permission, also put many of your family members or something like many of your family members' genetic information into that same database. I think with the advent of big popular public genetic companies, lots of people have been surrendering their control over their genetic information willy-nilly without quite knowing what was going to be done with it.
But now 23andMe, the company that has collected genetic samples from millions of customers, is filing for bankruptcy.
So I learned about the 23andMe sale via email. If you hadn't gotten that email, you hadn't known to delete your data, it just would have been passed along. And I think there's this belief that, if you weren't paying attention, then you must not have cared. But I don't think that's really fair, because I think if you really asked someone point blank, I think they would say they cared about who controls their genetic information.
In a statement, 23andMe says it will continue operating its business in the ordinary course during bankruptcy proceedings, adding there are no changes to the way the company stores, manages, or protects customer data. But in 2023, a cyber breach exposed the data of nearly 7 million customers. 23andMe settled a lawsuit for $30 million.
So because I know one of the options for participation in the class action was just to get $100, sort of as recognition that, oopsies, your data was leaked, I don't think that really does anything other than force the company to sort of acknowledge that it failed in some respect. But really, it doesn't compensate for the actual damages, because those damages could potentially be massive, especially if somebody is trying to target me because of my identity. There was deliberate targeting of particular groups. I think it was specific to Chinese people and people of Jewish descent. So even though the case has essentially been closed in the eyes of the law, and the law, from its own perspective, has provided an appropriate remedy, I don't think it has done nearly enough to address the harms of the breach, and it has actually permitted future potential harm by allowing the sale to go through without forcing the companies involved, 23andMe and whoever bought the company, to do a better job of letting participants know that their data is going to be sold, taken away from them essentially, this time completely legally. So whoever buys the data is now going to have the exact same amount of power as whoever stole the data in the breach.
Quite broadly, I don't think that tort or other kinds of private actions, contract, for example, I don't think those are the best ways to address our concerns about misuse of genetic data. I think what's really required is regulation. And I think the regulation that's required is not about access to and sharing of data, but about particular kinds of use of data that we don't like.
I can't believe that I was allowed to just buy something off the internet, spit in a tube, and send it to this company. If a business relies on the fact that its consumers essentially do not understand what their data is going to be used for, how it's going to be stored, if that's their business model, I don't think we can call that consent, because as the consumer, I had a very poor understanding of what was going to happen beyond just me sending in my sample, especially because the uses of genetic data are constantly increasing, they're constantly changing. There's so many incentives to do new things and to develop new technologies with genetic data. So at the time, even if it could be argued that I understood what was possible then, there is no way you could argue that I understood everything that would be possible in the future. The idea of adoption was also really pushed by 23andMe, because even though I imagine adoptees aren't the biggest percentage of their actual user population, I think the story of an adoptee potentially reunited with a family, someone who's been able to find their biological family, is such a compelling narrative that these companies just use that sort of trope in order to draw in other users, because it normalizes the product and it makes it seem like, how could something with the potential for so much good lead to harm?